Dad gets fired for BS reasons. Plays the long game. Ends up in charge. Takes the extended family on a cruise. My dad had worked at the same company for almost 30 years before he was abruptly fired for complete bullshit. He was coordinating an upcoming meeting of people who had to fly in from around the country. One important participant resigned unexpectedly. So Dad cancelled the meeting via email and explained why. Apparently that counted as improperly communicating privileged information. And he was fired the next day. All this happened a week after Dad's boss retired and was replaced by a new guy who wanted to cut costs. What a coincidence. This was about 10 years ago. Near the height of the recession. Dad was in his 50s. Hadn't interviewed for a job since the early 1980s. He wasn't sure he'd ever find another job. My mom went back to work at a school to pay the bills. While Dad scraped together what he could doing some shizzy online consulting gigs for basically minimum wage. They managed to keep their heads above water. But only barely. Dad was out of work for a year and a half. He finally landed a job at a new company 3 states away. Coincidentally about an hour away from where my wife and I lived and were expecting Dad's first grandchild. Mom and Dad moved to live about 20 minutes away from us. They had paid off the mortgage on their house. So they decided to keep it and rent it out. Planning to retire there in a few years. New company treated Dad very well. Better salary than he'd made at old company. Good benefits. And respect from his co-workers and superiors. A year later, Mom and Dad were able to buy a second, smaller house near their grandkids. Dad mentioned a few things about his time at old company to his new bosses. Nothing confidential or anything. More like overall strengths and weaknesses. Of course, the story of how he got fired came out as well. It turns out that when you work at a company for over 25 years you learn a thing or two about how it works. And cutting costs by firing experienced employees can make your company vulnerable. New comp. Any started to get very interested. They saw an important business opportunity. And also a chance to get revenge on behalf of a valued employee. A couple years later, new company bought old company. They were both big companies. And mergers of this size take time. But when the dust settled it was clear there were redundancies, divisions and products that both companies had that new company only needed one of. They kept as many of old company's people as they could. And very few lost their jobs. Except, of course, for the people responsible for firing Dad. New company put Dad in charge of the building he used to work in at old company and let him choose his employees from both old and new companies. Dad had to move back to the old state. So new company helped sell his house in the new state and gave him a moving stipend of several $1,000s. But Mom and Dad were just moving back into their own house. They sold their new house that they'd made payments and improvements on for 5 years for a nice profit. With that money plus the moving stipend, they paid off debts, saved for retirement, and took me, my siblings, our spouses, and the grandkids on a cruise. Edit. Since people are asking, I never heard exactly what transpired when the guy who fired Dad got downsized. But, since it's Christmas, I'm actually able to just ask him. Dad wouldn't say. Exit interviews are supposed to stay private. I told him about this post, with all the names left out, and that people wanted to know. He just grinned and said, that would be improperly communicating privileged information. Would love to hear details of the revenge. Such as what may have been said to the guy who fired your dad that would have been fantastic. No matter. Good to hear your dad landed on his feet and used one of them to boot those who wronged him in the past. Thanks. Some pretty wholesome revenge if I've ever seen it. I think the best part is the dad was very concerned about making sure people kept their jobs. It just shows empathy from being fired for BS. Some say that living well is the best revenge. But I'd say that living well and firing the guy who fired you improperly is pretty good too. Hope it makes up for that year and a half that was rough on him. Yeah, it's the life lesson of just being nice to people. Not necessarily just because they could be your boss someday, but because it doesn't hurt to be a kind person. Good intro, but could use something more at the end. The old "hi, remember me" moment during the exit interview of the old boss would fit well. Needs more cowbell. Yeah, but the lack of that lends credibility to the story in my opinion. The "agreed" makes me miss my dad. Especially today. I hope it's a true story, but for a company to want to take over another company to take revenge for an employee seems a lot. The fact that an experienced employee was fired made it seem that the company was at a vulnerable stage, which allowed the new company to take advantage. Not necessarily just getting revenge. Damn, I wish I could consider a paid-off mortgage on a house, barely keeping my head above water. During a recession. Then getting another job that pays just as well so you can buy a second house. Not to mention one large company buying another based on the word of one person. That was a lot of rambling with no revenge. Who peed in your eggnog? Scrooge? You're really just the. This is 100% an example of not burning bridges. Don't step on people on the way up. You never know who you'll need on the way down. I look forward to the follow-up story where the guy that got fired by dad for firing dad earlier gets a job at another competing company who is also willing to purchase a competitor out of spite on behalf of a new employee. And then the dad firer turned dad fiery once again becomes the dad firer. Good revenge story, but I do have to ask. Is it possible that the specific person who fired your dad was under orders from his own management to downsize? If it wasn't actually his own decision, then the revenge wasn't placed on the right person. Based on the op, it seems like you may not have that information because of your dad's response. By no means am I defending the person who fired your father. I'm just trying to get as much info as possible. The messenger always gets shot. I'm calling BS. If these were fairly big companies as you said, they wouldn't just hire any middle manager to handle this type of personnel merge. They have highly capable people manage this. Director level at least. Your dad took 1.5 years to get a new job, therefore not a great skill set, and was close to not making ends meet, lower income. Therefore not a very high up person would no way be given that responsibility. I don't think you understand how executive jobs work. It's not uncommon for them to wait around for 8 months to a year before getting another high-value job from somebody looking for a person like that. These stories are actually quality compared to those shizzy revenge stories that are about exciting as a rock. That's very rude to the rocks. They are very entertaining compared to a lot of stories here, grinning, squinting face.